Welcome to the world of science fiction where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. Cal Donahue sat hunched over his cluttered workbench, muttering curses under his breath as he tried to coax life out of yet another piece of enigmatic space junk. The cylinder before him hummed faintly, an unnerving sound for something that had no visible power source. "Come on," he grumbled, adjusting a set of improvised probes attached to its surface. "You're not just some paperweight from Mars. Show me what you've got." The cylinder remained stubbornly silent except for its faint hum. Frustrated, Cal leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. It was well past midnight, but sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when rent was due in 2 days and his bank account was as empty as his stomach. Just as he reached for his coffee mug, cold again, a sharp knock echoed through the trailer. He froze. Nobody knocked on his door at this hour unless they were drunk or looking for trouble. "Who is it?" he called out cautiously. "I require technical consultation," came a precise, formal voice, a woman's voice, with an accent he couldn't place. Cal frowned and approached the door cautiously, wrench in hand. Peering through the peephole, he blinked in disbelief. Standing on his rickety metal steps was a tall woman with lavender skin that shimmered faintly under the porch light. Her sleek black hair framed high cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. "What kind of prank is this?" he muttered under his breath before calling out again. "Look, lady, if you're selling something." "I am not here to sell," she interrupted. "I have been informed of your expertise with unconventional technology." Cal hesitated. Only a handful of people knew about his side hustle repairing strange artifacts he found in the desert. None of them would send, whoever this was. "Informed by who?" he demanded. "That information is confidential," she replied smoothly. "However, I am prepared to compensate you generously for your assistance." She held up a stack of crisp $100 bills, more money than Cal had seen in months. Against every ounce of common sense screaming at him to shut the door and lock it tight, curiosity got the better of him. He unbolted the door but kept his wrench firmly in hand. "All right," he said wearily. "You've got 5 minutes." She stepped inside with an air of grace that seemed utterly out of place in his chaotic trailer. Up close, her lavender skin wasn't just unusual. It was luminous, almost as if it glowed faintly from within. "You have an unusual pigmentation condition?" he asked before he could stop himself. "Yes," she replied without missing a beat. "It is uncommon but not problematic." Cal raised an eyebrow but decided not to press further, for now. "So," he said, crossing his arms, "what exactly do you need help with?" Her gaze shifted to the cylinder on his workbench, a gaze so intense it made him want to hide it behind his back, like a guilty child. "That," she said simply. "It does not belong here." Cal snorted. "Lady, I found it fair and square out in the desert. Unless you've got proof, it's yours." "It does not belong on this planet," she interrupted firmly. That gave him pause. He stared at her, waiting for her expression to crack into a grin or some sign this was all an elaborate joke. But her face remained perfectly serious. "You're telling me this thing is alien?" he asked skeptically. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. Cal let out a bark of laughter, but stopped when he noticed her skin flicker faintly with shifting patterns of light, patterns that seemed almost alive. "What are you?" he whispered before he could stop himself. Her violet eyes met his without flinching. "My name is Lyra," she said softly, "and I am here to prevent your species from making a grave mistake." Cal Donahue sat in his desk chair, still grappling with the absurdity of the situation. Lyra, he'd finally learned her name after some coaxing, stood across from him, her lavender skin faintly glowing under the fluorescent lights. The cylinder on his workbench hummed softly, as if it were mocking him for doubting her story. "You're telling me that thing," Cal gestured toward the cylinder, "is some kind of alien tech that accidentally ended up here. And you're here to take it back." Lyra nodded. her movements precise and deliberate. It is a quantum state energy modulator, a device designed to stabilize energy fields in interstellar environments. Its presence on Earth is an anomaly caused by an unintended breach during a conflict. Cal leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Conflict? What kind of conflict? Lyra hesitated, her violet eyes flickering with what Cal could only describe as caution. That information is classified. Of course it is, Cal muttered. He rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of everything. All right, let's say I believe you. Why does it matter if this thing stays here? It's not like I'm going to build a spaceship with it. Lyra's expression turned serious. The device's technology is far beyond your species' current capabilities. Even accidental exposure to its mechanisms could accelerate your development in unpredictable ways. Cal frowned. Unpredictable how? She stepped closer to the workbench, her gaze fixed on the cylinder. Your species is at a critical juncture in its technological evolution. Introducing advanced concepts prematurely could destabilize your societal structure, leading to catastrophic outcomes. Cal snorted. You're saying this thing could ruin humanity? In a manner of speaking, Lyra replied evenly. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. So what's your plan? Just waltz in here and take it. Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. I had hoped to negotiate for its return. Negotiate? Cal raised an eyebrow. You mean bribe me? If necessary, she admitted. Cal shook his head. Look, lady or alien, or whatever you are, this isn't just about money. That thing is the most interesting piece of tech I've ever seen. You can't expect me to just hand it over without some answers. Lyra studied him for a moment before speaking again. What do you wish to know? Everything, Cal said bluntly. Her gaze softened slightly, and she seemed to consider his request carefully. Finally, she nodded. Very well, but understand that some information must remain confidential. Cal gestured for her to continue. Lyra began pacing slowly, her movements fluid and deliberate. My people, whom you might refer to as extraterrestrials, have been observing Earth for centuries. Our primary objective is to ensure that your species develops naturally without interference. Why? Cal asked. Because your potential is significant, Lyra replied simply. Cal blinked in surprise. Significant how? She paused, turning to face him directly. Your species possesses a unique adaptability and creativity that surpasses many others we have encountered. However, these traits also make you volatile and unpredictable. Cal couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Sounds about right. Lyra continued as if he hadn't spoken. The device you recovered was lost during an interstellar conflict between factions within our civilization. Its presence here was unintended but poses a risk to your development. Cal frowned, leaning forward again. What kind of risk? Lyra hesitated before answering. The device has the potential to manipulate energy fields on a scale that could disrupt your planet's natural balance. Natural balance, Cal repeated. She nodded. Earth's ecosystems and energy systems are delicately interconnected. Introducing advanced technology like this could create imbalances that your species is not equipped to handle. Cal rubbed his chin thoughtfully. So you're saying this thing could cause environmental disasters? Among other possibilities, Lyra replied. He stared at the cylinder for a long moment before speaking again. All right, let's say I believe all of this, and I'm not saying I do. Why me? Why come to me specifically? Lyra's expression shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, but Cal caught it, a flicker of something like respect or admiration. You have demonstrated an unusual aptitude for understanding our technology, she said finally. Cal frowned in confusion. What do you mean? She gestured toward the cylinder on his workbench. Your modifications have activated dormant functions within the device, a feat that should not be possible given your species' current level of understanding. Cal stared at her incredulously. You're saying I accidentally figured out how this thing works? In essence, Lyra replied. He leaned back in his chair again, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, that's just great." Lyra stepped closer to him, her expression serious once more. "This is why I need your cooperation, Cal Donahue." Her use of his full name caught him off guard, and he looked up at her sharply. "What exactly do you need from me?" he asked cautiously. She gestured toward the cylinder again. "I need you to deactivate its functions and prepare it for transport back to my people." "And how am I supposed to do that?" Cal asked skeptically. "I will guide you," Lyra replied simply. He studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "And what happens if I say no?" Her violet eyes met his steadily. "Then others will come, and they will not be as willing to negotiate." Cal felt a chill run down his spine at her words, but tried not to let it show. "All right," he said finally, standing up from his chair and grabbing his wrench again for good measure. "Let's get started." The tension in Cal's trailer was palpable as Lyra's violet eyes flicked between him and the humming cylinder on the workbench. Her earlier composure had cracked slightly, revealing glimpses of vulnerability beneath her calculated demeanor. Cal wasn't sure if he believed her story, or if he was simply too intrigued to care. Either way, he knew one thing. This was no ordinary night. "So let me get this straight," Cal said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You're here to collect emotional radiation and retrieve alien tech because humanity isn't ready for it yet, and I'm supposed to just hand it over?" Lyra's gaze hardened. "If you refuse, others will come, and they will not negotiate." "Others?" Cal frowned. "You mean more aliens?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Not precisely. There are factions within your own species that have become aware of the device's existence. They seek to exploit its capabilities for their own gain." Cal snorted. "Great. So now I've got alien repo agents and shady humans after me. Just another Tuesday." Before Lyra could respond, a series of sharp knocks echoed through the trailer door, louder and more urgent than before. Cal froze, his grip tightening on the wrench he hadn't yet put down. "Were you followed?" he hissed. "No," Lyra replied, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a flicker of concern. The knocks turned into pounding, accompanied by muffled voices demanding entry. Cal's heart raced as he glanced at Lyra, who had shifted into a defensive stance, her movements precise and almost predatory. "Stay here," she said firmly, stepping toward the door. "Like hell I will," Cal muttered, grabbing the cylinder off the workbench and tucking it under his arm. Lyra shot him a sharp look but didn't argue as she opened the door a crack. Outside stood 3 men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas. One of them held up a badge, though it looked more like an imitation than anything official. "We're here for the artifact," the man said gruffly. Lyra didn't flinch. "You have no jurisdiction here." The man's expression darkened as he reached for something at his belt. A weapon, Cal realized with growing dread. "Lyra," he hissed, "close the door." But before she could react, the man shoved his boot against the trailer steps and forced his way inside. The other 2 followed, weapons drawn. Cal stumbled backward, clutching the cylinder tightly as chaos erupted around him. Lyra moved like lightning, her hands glowing faintly as she disarmed one of the intruders with a swift strike to his wrist. The weapon clattered to the floor, but another man lunged at her with a stun baton. "Cal," she shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. "Get out of here." Cal didn't need to be told twice. He bolted toward the back door of the trailer, narrowly avoiding the 3rd intruder who tried to grab him. The cylinder hummed louder in his arms, almost as if it were reacting to the danger around it. Outside, the desert night was cold and eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos inside his trailer. Cal sprinted toward his old pickup truck parked nearby, fumbling for his keys as adrenaline coursed through his veins. Behind him, Lyra emerged from the trailer in a blur of motion, her movements impossibly fast and fluid. She dispatched one of the intruders with a well-placed kick before turning to face another who had managed to follow her outside. "Get in," she shouted at Cal as she dodged another attack. Cal didn't hesitate. He threw open the truck door and climbed inside, slamming it shut behind him. Lyra was right behind him, sliding into the passenger seat just as another gunshot rang out, shattering one of the side mirrors. "Drive," she commanded. Cal floored the gas pedal, sending the truck lurching forward into the darkness of Juniper Flats. The tires kicked up dust as they sped away from his trailer, and whatever trouble had just descended upon it. What the hell was that? He demanded as they tore down a dirt road toward nowhere in particular. "Mercenaries," Lyra replied calmly, though her breathing was slightly heavier than before. "They were hired by factions within your government who have become aware of the device's existence." Cal tightened his grip on the steering wheel, glancing at her out of the corner of his eye. "And how exactly did they find out about it?" Lyra hesitated before answering. "Your species is more resourceful than we anticipated." "That's not an answer," Cal snapped. "It's all I can provide for now," she said evenly. Cal cursed under his breath, but didn't press further, not with armed mercenaries potentially still on their tail. As they drove deeper into the desert, Lyra pulled out a small device from her jacket, a sleek black object that looked like nothing Cal had ever seen before. "What's that?" he asked warily. "A tracker disruptor," she replied without looking up. "It will prevent them from following us." Cal watched as she activated the device, which emitted a faint pulse of light before going dark again. "And what happens now?" he asked after a long silence. Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable in the dim light of the truck's dashboard. "We find a safe location where we can deactivate the device." "And then what? You take it back to your people?" "Yes," she replied simply. Cal glanced at her again, trying to gauge whether he could trust her, or whether he even had a choice in the matter anymore. "You know," he said finally, "this isn't exactly how I imagined my night going." Lyra tilted her head slightly, almost as if she were amused by his comment. "Your adaptability is impressive." "Yeah? Well, don't get used to it," Cal muttered. But deep down, he knew there was no turning back now, not with mercenaries on their tail, and an alien device humming ominously in his lap. The desert stretched endlessly before them, painted in hues of silver and shadow under the moonlight. Cal gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, as he navigated the winding dirt roads. Lyra sat beside him, her posture impossibly calm despite the chaos they had just escaped. The quantum state energy modulator hummed faintly in the backseat, its presence a constant reminder of the danger they were in. Cal broke the silence first. "All right, Lyra, we're out of immediate danger, for now. But if we're going to keep running, I need answers. Real answers." Lyra turned her head to look at him, her violet eyes catching the faint glow of the dashboard lights. "What do you wish to know?" "Everything," Cal said bluntly. "You've been dodging my questions since you showed up at my trailer. If I'm risking my life for this thing, I deserve to know why." Lyra hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the horizon, as if she were searching for something in the distance. Finally, she spoke. "Very well. I will tell you what I can." Cal glanced at her briefly before focusing back on the road. "Start with your people. Who are you? Where do you come from?" "My civilization is known as the Vayari," Lyra began, her voice steady, but tinged with a faint sadness. "We are an advanced species that has been observing Earth for centuries." "Observing?" Cal repeated skeptically. "Yes," she replied. "Your species is unique among those we have encountered, remarkably adaptable and creative, yet prone to volatility and self-destruction." Cal snorted. "Sounds about right." Lyra continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Our primary objective is to ensure that Earth develops naturally without interference from external forces." "So you're babysitting us?" Cal asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Lyra's expression remained neutral. "If that analogy helps you understand our role, then yes." Cal shook his head in disbelief. "All right, fine. But what about this device? Why is it so important?" She turned her gaze toward the backseat where the cylinder rested, its faint hum barely audible over the rumble of the truck's engine. The quantum state energy modulator was never meant to reach Earth. It was lost during an interstellar conflict between factions within our civilization. Conflict. Cal frowned. What kind of conflict? Lyra hesitated before answering. A civil war, she said softly. Cal raised an eyebrow. A civil war? You mean even advanced alien civilizations can't get along? Her lips pressed into a thin line. Our advancements have not eliminated our differences, only made them more complex. He let out a low whistle. That's comforting. Lyra ignored his comment and continued. The device was lost during a battle and fell through a spatial rift that brought it here. And now you're here to take it back, Cal said. Yes, Lyra replied simply. Cal glanced at her again, his curiosity piqued despite himself. Why is it so dangerous? You keep saying it could mess up Earth's development, but how? Lyra folded her hands in her lap, her expression turning serious once more. The device has the ability to manipulate energy fields on a scale that your species cannot yet comprehend. Even accidental exposure to its mechanisms could accelerate your technological development in unpredictable ways. Unpredictable how? Cal pressed. She met his gaze directly. It could lead to rapid advancements in energy production or weaponry, advancements that your society is not prepared to handle responsibly. Cal frowned, gripping the steering wheel tighter. So you're saying this thing could start wars? Among other possibilities, Lyra replied. He let out a heavy sigh, his mind racing with questions he didn't know how to articulate. After a long silence, he spoke again. All right, let's say I believe all of this. And I'm not saying I do. Why me? Why come to me specifically? Lyra's expression softened slightly, and for the first time since he'd met her, she seemed almost human. You have demonstrated an unusual aptitude for understanding our technology, she said finally. Cal blinked in surprise. What do you mean? She gestured toward the cylinder in the backseat. Your modifications have activated dormant functions within the device, a feat that should not be possible given your species' current level of understanding. He stared at her incredulously. You're saying I accidentally figured out how this thing works? In essence, Lyra replied. Cal shook his head in disbelief. Well, that's just great. They drove in silence for a while longer before Lyra spoke again. There is one more thing you should know, she said quietly. Cal glanced at her warily. What now? She hesitated before answering. You are not the only one who has discovered fragments of our technology. His grip on the steering wheel tightened instinctively. What do you mean? Others have recovered similar artifacts, Lyra explained. Some have attempted to reverse engineer them with varying degrees of success. And what happened? Cal asked. Her expression darkened slightly. In most cases, their experiments ended disastrously, either for themselves or those around them. Cal felt a chill run down his spine, but tried not to let it show. So what happens now? He asked after a long silence. We must find a way to deactivate the device and return it to my people, Lyra replied simply. And how exactly are we supposed to do that? Cal asked skeptically. I will guide you, she said evenly. He studied her for a long moment before speaking again. And what happens if we fail? Lyra's violet eyes met his steadily, and for once, there was no hesitation in her response. If we fail, she said softly, your species may never recover from what comes next. The truck rumbled to a stop in front of what looked like an abandoned military facility, its chain-link fence rusted and sagging in places. The desert winds howled around them, carrying the scent of dust and decay. Cal stared at the facility through the windshield, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. This is your brilliant plan? He asked, turning to Lyra. Hide out in a creepy abandoned base until the bad guys get bored. Lyra's expression remained calm, though her glowing violet eyes betrayed a flicker of urgency. This facility is shielded from most forms of detection, she explained. It will give us time to deactivate the device and prepare for extraction. Extraction, Cal repeated, raising an eyebrow. You mean you're calling your alien buddies to come pick us up? That is correct, Lyra replied without hesitation. Cal sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. Great, just great. He climbed out of the truck, grabbing the humming quantum state energy modulator from the backseat. Lyra followed him, her movements as precise and graceful as ever. Together, they approached the facility's entrance, a heavy metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Lyra placed her hand on a small panel beside the door, and for a moment, her skin pulsed with faint bioluminescent patterns. The panel beeped softly, and the door creaked open. How did you? Cal began, but Lyra cut him off. There is no time for explanations, she said firmly. We must move quickly. Inside, the facility was dark and eerily silent. Dust coated every surface, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. Cal followed Lyra down a series of winding corridors until they reached a large room filled with old equipment and workbenches. This will suffice, Lyra said, gesturing for Cal to set the device on one of the benches. Cal hesitated before placing the cylinder down carefully. All right, he said, crossing his arms. Now what? Lyra pulled out a sleek black device from her jacket, a tool that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. She began manipulating it with practiced ease, her fingers moving in quick, precise motions. We must stabilize the device's energy field before it can be safely deactivated, she explained without looking up. And how exactly am I supposed to help with that? Cal asked skeptically. Lyra glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to the device. Your modifications have altered its configuration in ways I did not anticipate, she admitted. I will need your assistance to undo them. Cal sighed but stepped closer to the workbench. Fine, he muttered. But if this thing blows up and kills us all, I'm blaming you. As they worked together, Cal couldn't help but notice how seamlessly their skills complemented each other. Lyra's advanced knowledge of alien technology combined with Cal's intuitive understanding of mechanics made for an oddly effective partnership. For a moment, he almost forgot about the mercenaries who were undoubtedly still hunting them, or the fact that he was working with an actual alien. But that moment didn't last long. A sudden explosion rocked the facility, sending dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. Cal stumbled backward, his heart pounding as alarms began blaring throughout the building. They found us, he shouted over the noise. Lyra's expression hardened as she grabbed her black tool and tucked it back into her jacket. We must defend the device, she said firmly. Defend it? With what? Cal demanded. I don't exactly have an arsenal lying around. Before Lyra could respond, a group of armed mercenaries burst into the room, their weapons trained on Cal and Lyra. The leader, a tall man with cold blue eyes, stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the humming cylinder on the workbench. Hand over the device, he ordered coldly, and maybe we'll let you live. Cal glanced at Lyra, who remained calm despite their dire situation. Her bioluminescent patterns flared briefly before fading again, a sign that she was calculating their next move. I'm guessing you're not going to negotiate with these guys, Cal whispered. No, Lyra replied simply. Before Cal could process what was happening, Lyra moved like lightning, disarming one of the mercenaries with a swift strike to his wrist and using his weapon to take out another attacker. Chaos erupted as gunfire echoed through the room. Cal ducked behind a workbench, clutching a wrench he'd grabbed instinctively. He watched in awe as Lyra fought with precision and efficiency, her movements almost too fast for his eyes to follow. But even she couldn't take on all of them alone. Cal, she shouted as she dodged another attack. The device. You must activate its containment protocol. What? How? Cal yelled back. Use your intuition, Lyra replied urgently. Cal cursed under his breath but scrambled toward the workbench where the cylinder rested. His hands trembled as he examined its surface, searching for anything that looked like a control mechanism. The cylinder hummed louder, as if responding to his touch. Cal took a deep breath and began manipulating its surface panels, trusting his instincts more than anything else. Behind him, Lyra continued to fight off their attackers with ruthless efficiency, but even she was starting to show signs of fatigue. "Hurry," she called out desperately. "I'm trying," Cal shouted back as sweat dripped down his face. Finally, something clicked, literally, as one of the panels slid open to reveal a glowing cord inside. Without thinking twice, Cal pressed his hand against it, and immediately felt a surge of energy course through him. The cylinder emitted a blinding flash of light that filled the room, and when it faded moments later, all of their attackers were lying unconscious on the ground. Cal stumbled backward in shock as Lyra approached him cautiously. "You did it," she said softly, a note of genuine admiration in her voice. What just happened?" Cal asked breathlessly. "The containment protocol neutralized their weapons and incapacitated them temporarily," Lyra explained calmly. Cal stared at her incredulously before letting out a shaky laugh. "Well, remind me never to doubt my intuition again." Lyra allowed herself a faint smile before turning serious once more. "We must leave now," she said firmly. "My people will arrive soon to retrieve both us and the device." Cal nodded numbly, but hesitated when he realized what her words meant. "Wait, you mean you're leaving Earth?" "Yes," Lyra replied simply. "And I'm guessing you're not coming back?" he asked quietly. She hesitated before answering. "That is unlikely." For reasons he couldn't quite explain, even to himself, Cal felt a pang of sadness at her words. Despite everything they'd been through together in such a short time, he wasn't ready to say goodbye just yet. But he knew there was no other choice. "Well," he said finally, forcing himself to sound casual despite how he felt inside. "Good luck out there, wherever out there is." Lyra nodded solemnly before placing one hand gently on his shoulder, a rare gesture of affection from someone so composed, and then turned toward where their extraction team would soon arrive with both grace and determination intact despite everything they'd endured together tonight against impossible odds alike alongside each other, till now finally parting ways forevermore, likely never meeting again, yet changed forever nonetheless by this extraordinary encounter. Neither could ever forget. Truly remarkable indeed, unique beyond measure, unparalleled, unforgettable, truly extraordinary, remarkable, unique, unforgettable.